The 16th century was a time of great unrest in the religious sphere of Western Europe. Growing dissatisfaction with the behavior of the clergy, considered by many to be immoral, gave rise to calls for reforms. The memory of Pope Alexander VI, with his many romantic relationships and numerous children, is only the most visible exponent of broader issues, which included, for example, the sale of indulgences and nepotism in the selection for ecclesiastical promotions. We speak of a period in the history of Christianity right after a remarkable moment, which was influential not only in spiritual issues but also political, the Western Schism, which lasted between 1378 and 1417. European leaders found themselves divided between obedience to the papacy of Rome and that of Avignon, creating several decades of instability and disagreements between European countries. At the same time, Europe was experimenting with new ways of thinking, which were direct consequences of the Renaissance and humanist currents. These also extended to the religious sphere. The famous phrase of Protagoras, a sophist philosopher who lived in the 5th century BC, became increasingly relevant. Man is the measure of all things. This way of thinking led to the centralization of world vision in the individual and extended to forms of religious individualism. Several thinkers within Western Christianity began to interpret spirituality in a more personal way, less focused on the Church's guidelines. Still in the 15th century, scholars such as John Wycliffe, a Catholic theologian and professor at the University of Oxford, began to present complaints against the state of Christianity and to postulate changes to improve the spiritual life of people. In the transition between the two centuries lived also one of the most influential thinkers within Western thought, an individual whose name echoed throughout the religious reformations, Desiderius Erasmus, commonly known as Erasmus of Rotterdam. Until the end of his life, he sought to defend doctrines such as synergism. In an extremely simplified form, the idea that man has some responsibility for his salvation through the role of free will in the matter of belief and disbelief. He also defended the return to the original message of the scriptures, the importance of reason in man's experience, and the renewed morality as a result of the original precepts of the Church. Thus, following widespread displeasure and voices that had been heard for many decades, a movement of theological rupture took place in Europe, and, as a consequence, a rupture happened with the Catholic Church. This expressed itself on several fronts, through the creation of different denominations of Christianity which denied the authority of the Pope. It all began officially by the hand of Martin Luther, who in 1517 posted the 95 Theses against indulgences on the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church, in open rebellion against Leo X's bull of indulgence. Shortly before, at the Fifth Council of Lateran, an unsuccessful attempt had been made to reform the Church. Communication between the Pope and Martin Luther proved impossible. Leo X demanded through the bull Exsurge Domine that Luther retracted his words, threatening him with excommunication. Luther, however, was determined to continue, even if this meant a papal rupture. In just 1 year, he published 3 manifestos of fierce criticism not only against the Pope and the clergy, but also against dogmas of the Catholic Church. As expected, in 1520 he was effectively excommunicated. Luther's actions were, in a way, benefited by the desire for political independence of European princes and kings. Dependence on papal authority became, for some of them, inconvenient. Instead of positioning themselves in support of the papal states, several individuals in turn positioned themselves on the side of Reformation. Frederick, Prince-Elector of Saxe, protected Luther in his castle, and thanks to his sponsorship, the Bible, until then inaccessible to the vast majority of people, was translated into German. From then on, Lutheranism spread to different parts of the region that today corresponds to Germany. Now, princes are no longer subordinate, hierarchically and socially, to ecclesiastical authority. In the centre of Europe, another competing denomination appeared. Now that the Catholic Church was no longer seen as having the monopoly on interpreting Scripture, people were beginning their own ability to analyze it. In Geneva, the French theologian John Calvin, fleeing from persecutions in France, established a doctrine based on predestination. For this religious man, humanity had little say in its own salvation. Only God would choose those who would be saved and those who would be condemned. Despite having seen the effects of religious persecution himself, or perhaps precisely in the sequence, Calvin took strict measures to impose his form of religion. Some historians considered he created a form of theocracy and religious dictatorship, which included prosecutions and executions. In time, the Reformation also arrived in England, but in a different way. In 1509, King Henry VIII had married the widow of his late brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales. This marriage lasted 24 years. Although the Queen Catherine of Aragon gave birth to a male heir, little Henry Jr. lived less than 2 months. In 1525, the only legitimate heir to the English throne was Mary Tudor, their daughter. Henry VIII developed a fixation with the question of the male heir, partly due to the bloody civil wars experienced in England throughout the Middle Ages. He wanted, above all, stability and the strengthening of the Tudor dynasty. In the sequence, he fell in love, or in lust, with Anne Boleyn, the Queen's lady-in-waiting, and thus sought a divorce, alleging that his marriage to his brother's widow was immoral. He did not succeed in this quest. The Pope had been imprisoned by Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, and by unlucky coincidence for the king, nephew of Catherine of Aragon herself. Thus, the separation from Rome took place, and the steps to develop the Anglican Church began. Since the Act of Supremacy in 1534, the head of church and the spiritual leader of the English people has been the monarch. The Anglican Church developed, to a large extent, under the influence of the Protestant movements of the 16th century, despite having developed its own liturgy and interpretations distinct from the Lutheran and Calvinist denominations. As for Henry, he did marry Anne Boleyn and had her executed shortly afterwards. He had in total 6 wives. In addition to Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, he also married Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. Hence the famous mnemonic, divorced, beheaded, and died, divorced, beheaded, survived. From his efforts towards securing a male successor, only one legitimate son was born, Edward, who reigned as Edward VI and died at only 15 years old. While Central and Northern Europe gave way to the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic sphere did not remain indifferent. In 1536, Pope Paul III called a new ecumenical council, this time in Trent, with a strong intention of reforming the Catholic Church. This council resulted in important resolutions for the future of this denomination. While monasteries were being extinguished in England, the Council of Trent sought to establish norms of behaviour for both regular and secular clergy. New religious orders were created, many of them made of missionaries, sent on proselytizing missions to evangelize the new parts of the world with which Europeans now had commercial relations, or which they sought to colonize. Thus emerged, for example, the Society of Jesus or the Capuchins. At the same time, questions of a theological nature were debated, reaffirming the importance of dogmas that had been considered for many centuries: the sacraments, the scripture, the creed, Catholic tradition, and above all, the prohibition of individual interpretation of the Bible. The Catechism appeared in 1566, accompanied by changes in forms of worship. To better manage access to information, high religious hierarchies also practiced censorship, at a time when the press was developing more and more as a result of the Gutenberg printing machine, invented in 1439. The prohibited works were gathered in the Index in 1543. While in some parts of Northern Europe those who did not want to give up their faith to the new ideas of Protestantism were persecuted, the Catholic South persecuted those who did adhere to these ideas. This is called the Counter-Reformation, an active repression of Protestantism, which has as its exponent the creation of the famous Court of the Holy Office, or the Inquisition, with its history of persecution and reprisals, of autos de fe and widespread fear. Thus in countries such as Portugal, Spain and Italy, the tradition of Catholicism was preserved with the additions of the Council of Trent and the powerful arm of the Inquisition.